Well, now Boris Johnson has made it a cornerstone of his premiership that he is prepared to leave the EU without a deal. But what impact could that have? A major new report released today by King's College London brings together what government modelling and its own analysis predict could happen in the immediate aftermath as well as the weeks ahead. The number of lorries with the correct paperwork to enable them to cross the channel could halve within a day, whilst disruption to imports mean there could be a shortage of some fresh foods, fruit, vegetables and poultry within a fortnight. Direct rule of Northern Ireland could be reimposed and 40,000 jobs would be put at risk as a consequence of no deal. And the government predicts that a no-deal Brexit would reduce the UK's growth by 8% over the next 15 years, compared with staying in the European Union. The report concludes the impact of a no-deal Brexit will be significant, damaging and long-lasting. Well, joining us now is the lead author of the report, Professor Anand Menon, and who's from King's College London, and John Mills, businessman, former chairman of Vote Leave. Professor Menon, what enables you to give such specific figures? I mean, to say 15 years is a very specific number.
Well, the specific figure we give, about 8% over 15 years, is from the government's own estimate, so we quote them as such. So what we're saying is, we think that ultimately the clearest evidence of the economic damage of no deal is over the long term, because over the short to medium term it's relatively hard to know what precisely happens, who puts controls at when, what level tariffs might be that we impose. Over the longer term, what we're clear about is, all things being equal, and that's an important rider, our GDP will be smaller than it would have been had we stayed in the European Union. Now, that doesn't mean that other things won't intervene, changes to productivity, government policies here that can help our GDP, but we're just saying, looking at that one single thing, making trade significantly harder with your nearest and largest trading partner is going to have a negative impact.
John Mills, would you go so far as to say that leaving without a deal is not a good idea, according to these figures?
Well, I think we're in a rock and a hard place. I don't think we've got any easy options now. And I think the government's strategy of saying that they'd be prepared to contemplate a no deal to get something better does make some sense. Now, whether that strategy is going to work, whether it's going to come to fruition, I think it remains to be seen. And I think the situation is wobbling at the moment, so it's not certain that it will.
Now, do you suspect the professor has gone off the edge, or is he right in the heart of it there?
Well, I think that there's an enormous question about what assumptions you use to produce the results. I mean, for example, saying what's going to happen in 15 years' time is really, I think, very, very sort of risky.
What about lorries with paperwork? That seems pretty obvious that you know, the likelihood of everybody having the right paperwork and the rest of it the day after we leave is very small indeed.
But that's something that is under the British government's control. And what HMRC have said very clearly is what they'll do is to give priority to getting the goods through, getting the lorries moving, rather than getting hung up on paperwork. And this must be the most sensible thing to do.
Have you factored that in? Or?
Well, let me say three things. Firstly, on the forecasts themselves, we're very, very careful in the report to hedge what we say by saying, look, these are forecasts, they're not predictions. All sorts of other intervening things can happen in the next 15 years. We're not saying what the British economy will look like. We're saying that basically the impact of not being in the single market and the customs union will be deleterious to around that effect. On the trucks, it's absolutely true, as John says, that the British government has made a clear decision to prioritise flow over revenue. That is to say, we're going to keep things moving, even if it means we're not collecting the full tariff. The EU, and there's two sides to every border, has not said that. And that's the issue, is that whatever the British government does, for our things to move across that border, and indeed for our things to come back in over that border, the EU have got to play ball too. And what they've said very, very clearly is, we will be imposing the checks and the tariffs. The tariffs are less important than the checks in many ways from day one. If they can actually do that, it will have an immediate effect. But bear in mind, I'll just say one more thing. There's a lot of contingency here. The 1st of November is a public holiday in France. So that lorries are not allowed on public motorways in France on the 1st of November. So no one's expecting Armageddon on the first day. What we're saying, though, is that as these things kick in, there will be an impact.
Well, I mean, that does sound pretty irrefutable.
Well, I'm not sure it is. I mean, first of all, I don't think it... I've had years and years of experience of export paperwork, and it's not that difficult to do it. I'm sure some of the lorries that turn up won't have the paperwork in exactly the form it should be, and I understand they're going to be shunted on one side, while all the ones who have got the
But this is
paperwork
only
right
if
go
there's
through.
no deal. If there is a deal, then presumably there'll be all sorts of things like that will be sorted out. This is surely a document which actually deals with the question of no deal.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I think Anand's absolutely right in saying that if there's no deal and tariffs are imposed straight away, that is going to cause some problems and hiccups. I think the issue is...
So as a businessman, you might perhaps say to Boris Johnson, don't do it.
Well, I think nobody really wants no deal at all. Right across the spectrum, nobody wants no deal. What I do think the problem is if you're not prepared to walk away from a really bad deal, you finish up with one that's even worse. That's the dilemma we're facing.
Well, John Mills, Professor Anand Menon, thank you very much indeed for joining us.